We are going to be talking to Derek Leblanc. Is that how you say your last name?
Yep, Derek
Okay.
LeBlanc.
All right, awesome. Of Lethal Lovebirds LLC. So thank you so much for joining me today. So I want to start by talking about your business. What is
Okay.
your business? And then what are the services that you provide?
Okay. So I'm Lethal Lovebirds LLC, where I'm a NRA certified firearms instructor. And so, what I do is, personal protection training, defense, self-defense training, gun rights advocacy. Part of what we do also is we work with children as well. So we have a nonprofit that's kind of separate from what I do as on the defensive side, but it's all about, being able to protect children through, proper education.
I love hearing that because one of the arguments that I hear about not owning a gun is having a gun in the house with children.
Hmm.
Would you be able to talk a little bit more about what is your goal with education for children on gun safety?
So basically, the goal would be to just, give the kids and families proper tools on how to be safe with the firearm around the house. One thing that we've learned through 2020 is that there's a lot of new gun owners that have come into the fold, and there's been record new gun sales due to COVID, societal unrest. And so our goal as a foundation is to give these families good, relevant information to make sure to keep their kids safe. We lose eight to nine kids per day across the country, and that's something we're trying to do is to prevent that. The Kids Safe Foundation is a 501(c)(3) nonprofit based here in Oregon, and so that's kind of what we do is we educate the families with the parents about the responsibility of having a firearm in the home, but we're also educating and empowering the kids to make good, safe decisions.
And you brought up COVID and social unrest. You're right, there's been a ton more gun owners. I've talked to people just in my own personal space who have never thought about owning a gun, and
Hmm.
recently they've kind of changed their mind. I'm
Yeah.
told, like, oh, I'm actually kind of considering going, but they don't know how to go about doing it. They don't know the process, which we can get into a little bit later.
Hmm.
Why do you think that people are making that switch? People who have never thought about owning a gun before are now making that switch to seeking one out.
Well, I think what they're doing is they're seeing a lot on social media about, we're talking about defunding law enforcement. There's lots of talks of, further restriction on our rights. And, all of this is going to add to, more chaos. We also have, methamphetamine and heroin that's now been decriminalized in Oregon. And so I think families and people that are maybe on the fence about owning a gun are now seeing, the validity of our 2A rights. And, so as a firearms instructor, a professional firearms instructor with the Lethal Lovebirds LLC, my goal is to bring those people in for training, obviously, because, with these rights come great responsibilities. And so
Okay.
part of that is we have to know, our use of force. We have to know about proper storage of that firearm when it's not on us to protect ourselves and our kids, because we don't want to ever have a gun stolen. And we also definitely don't want to have our kids get hurt with that. And part of that is making these people that are new to guns is making them feel comfortable and understanding, this tool. It's, our firearms are a tool, they're not a toy. And so that's how we, protect our rights. We also, we become educated as the public, and we get more people involved to help, shore up our 2A rights.
That's so valuable. You call out the Second Amendment. That's a big one. That's one that's talked about a lot.
Mhm.
And that's one that's discussed politically in the sense of, do we get rid of it altogether or do we keep it? Joe Biden actually yesterday, I'm sure you might have saw
I saw it.
this.
Yeah.
Yeah, there was a statement that they are the Biden administration is pushing for Congress to make it more strict for getting a gun, but then also banning assault weapons. So first thing I want you to start, I'd love for you to talk about is for acquiring a gun. What is the process, and why is it that what we have right now is good?
Okay. So right now, every new gun that's bought in the state of Oregon has to go through a background check. The only caveat there is a husband could buy a gun and gift it to his wife. There's already legislation in place that helps protect people, and we can't just sell a gun to a private party any longer. That law changed a couple years ago. I haven't seen the data. I don't know if it's even saved a life, but it's part of law now. So part of this, you would go to a gun store, an FFL, a federal firearms licensee. There's a selection of firearms. You get to pick out which one that's fits your budget, which one fits your hand, what you're trying to accomplish. We have guns that do different things, right? Once you've decided on that firearm, then what you would do is fill out what's called a 4473 form. And this is a federal form that every FFL in the state of Oregon or across the country, you have to fill this out. And so what happens is once you fill out that form, you're entered into a queue. And so this queue is ran by the Oregon State Police. And right now, the last I heard the other day, the queue is actually up to 7,500 people waiting in line to buy a firearm.
Yeah, just on a personal note, obviously we're partakers in the Second Amendment, my husband and I, and he just went to get a gun recently, and before it was like a couple hours. I know that there's more to that, but that was kind of the turnaround time. This one took like a week and a half because the amount of people that are in line. So.
Yeah, and so this is a lot of these people. It's panic buying. They're afraid of. You talked a little bit about proposed legislation, and there's actually a House Bill 2543 that's in the queue in the pipeline right now. It's get a public hearing on the 18th in the Oregon legislature, which would give the Oregon State Police an indefinite amount of time to delay somebody's ability to purchase a firearm. Whoa. And so, as an advocate for myself, I think that's a huge abuse of power. Right now, what we're seeing with our queue up to 7,500 is there's people that legitimately need this firearm to be able to defend themselves and their families, and they're being denied that right because of just the long lines and the long wait. And that makes a lot of families vulnerable out there, and so ultimately it comes down to just being prepared and kind of being ahead of the curve and making sure that if you are going to decide to buy this firearm for your own personal protection or the protection of your family is there's going to be a wait. You can't just walk into a store and walk out with a firearm. The only difference there is maybe if you have a concealed handgun license. If you walk in, typically people with a CHL are going to the front of the line, and so it's really easy to buy a firearm that way. And so you're already ahead of the curve.
And I think on top of that, on top of personal protection, there's also this conversation around property and protecting your property. You brought up legislation, and I've been keeping track of this. I don't believe that it's going to go through because I think it's even overreaching for our political climate here in Oregon. But House Bill 2238, which is the governor will, should it pass, have the right to seize property, first of all, without compensation, which is against the Constitution. But then on top of that, seize any property during the state of an emergency. And there's a lot of business owners right now that are, while they may not be necessarily concerned about that bill coming through, because again, I don't know that it'll pass, there is a lot of conversation about are you able to protect even your property. Portland has been ransacked by Antifa, and businesses have just been destroyed. But we've seen all over the country where business owners have tried to protect their businesses with guns, with firearms, and they've been more attacked on that level than the people who have been attacking them in their business.
And that's the the $1 million question there is what we do to basically stop what's happening. The last I saw, 2238 is dead. I don't think it's going to be going any further, but I think it brings up an important point is where the governor wants to go with her legislation.
Exactly.
And she likes to use executive orders just like Joe Biden. because she doesn't get a check. Nobody checks her, and that's the problem. We have a legal system for a judicial system for a reason. And I think it's a complete abuse of power. And one thing I spent a lot of time, when all this happened, because I was out of work for two months. I couldn't train adults. I also couldn't train kids. There was actually a kid that was shot, 2 weeks into this lockdown, about 20 minutes from where I live and really close to where the location that I teach kids. So this is something that really affects me, and as a small business owner and somebody that's trying to help protect children. And so what I did realize is, part of her executive order, there is verbiage in there that would protects gun owners, that says that it's illegal under emergency declaration for the government to confiscate our firearms. And so that was kind of a benefit to, that's basically the only positive that I saw that came out of this emergency executive order. Because we, as private citizens, we have a God-given right to self-defense, and the government forgets and tries to not recognize that, but we have a constitutional protected Second Amendment right for a reason, and that's to be able to protect ourselves, our homes, our families, in certain cases a third person in the state of Oregon. And so that's what I advocate is people know the laws, they exercise their rights appropriately, and they carry a gun for personal protection.
Yeah, and in that Second Amendment, you talked about the third party, and that third party being a tyrannical government. And it's when you have a bill that, yes, is dead, it's still, what's the motive behind it? It's hard not to think of, why is this even being proposed? What would even be the reason for that? So I love that you called that out. Something else that Joe Biden is saying is banning assault weapons. Now, this conversation isn't new. This has been happening for years. Every time there is a school shooting, which is kind of how this was brought up again. I think it was the anniversary of the Parkland shooting.
Parkland, yep.
Yeah. That every time this happens, while it's tragic, it's always brought up assault weapons. Can you give us a definition of what is an assault weapon? What does that mean?
Well, so what they typically are talking about, they're talking about a black rifle, a modern sporting rifle. All of my rifles that I own are for a defensive purpose. They do not commit assaults. Typically, by definition, assault rifle is one that would be fully automatic. It could be one that was, it's possessed by someone in the military, and most likely across overseas, and it's used in wartime. And all the firearms, the modern sporting rifle, I call them, they're owned by civilians. So one thing they don't realize is there's over 17 million of these rifles in the country right now, okay, that they know of. Okay, some people can legally and ethically build these rifles to their own specifications, completely legal. Okay, we have an estimated 425 million firearms in the country. Okay, there was 8.25 million new first-time gun owners in 2020. Okay, we're not the problem here. And you brought up Parkland, and what they like to do is they like to use fear and emotion to further restrict our rights. And what happened in Parkland was senseless. But let's talk about the actual what happened in Parkland. We had 39 law enforcement contacts with the shooter. Nothing was done. Okay. Right. We also had a first responder, the only one that could have saved those children, that was hiding outside and did not breach the door to help protect those kids. Okay. We saw multiple failures at a local and state level that led to that mass killing, which I don't want to see anybody die. Okay. I'm a proponent of life. I want to protect children. I want to protect, our families. But ultimately, we have to call, the hypocrisy here. Okay, if we're going to look at data, okay, I love data because data does not lie. It can be tweaked and misused the way they see fit. But we talk about, they call it quote unquote assault rifles. Rifles kill about 250 people per year annually. Okay, more people are hurt by knives. More people are hurt by hammers, blunt force objects than rifles. And so with what we saw with the insurrection, the quote unquote insurrection, I think there's a definite fear in government because of, civilians having the ability to defend themselves and to stand up against this tyrannical government. And while I'm not saying that I advocate that we take rifles and go to the Capitol building. I'm just saying that the point of our Second Amendment right is to be able to have the capability to be able to defend ourselves and the state. That's it says in those 27 words, they say what they mean and they mean what they say. And they're often tweaked, they're often massaged, and ultimately we have this right set out in that Constitution for a reason.
Well, and there's a couple arguments that come through that. You're talking about like it was created for this. We have to think about, why was it created? Our founders, fled from a tyrannical government. They saw this, and then not only that, then there was the revolution, where it was like, we also now have to defend against another tyrannical government, and it just kept building to the point that it was like, we have to have this. This is why we have this. But there's not a senselessness to it, in the sense of we just have it and we can just go wild, wild west and do whatever we want. It is for our protection. If we don't need to use them, then we don't need to use them, but they're there. And that's a big part of the argument on the other side is, well, if they're just sitting there, then they're useless. What's the point? And then on top of that, it's like, if they're just going to sit there, if they're not going to be used, or someone breaks in, you don't necessarily need to use that kind of force. You can use other force. What's your talking point to that?
Why?
Right.
I mean, that's the thing is, I have a 30-round magazine for a reason. The reason I have a 30-round box magazine for an AR-15 is I could, if I live rurally, I could have a longer effective shot in a defensive manner. So I might need a longer barrel. I might have multiple attackers, right? Typically, when these people are going out in the country to commit these thefts, there's going to be a getaway driver. There could be multiple attackers. There's been multiple shootings across the country where a homeowner used an AR-15 in a defensive manner and shot multiple attackers and saved the day. Mm-hmm. And there's no scientific study between magazine capacity and extra lives lost. I mean, this is all smoke and mirrors. And what happens is gun control effectively, makes your ability as a lady, it's harder for you to defend yourself and your family. And ultimately, also affects people in urban environments at a higher rate than it does somebody like myself, right? And so that's why, the false premise of gun control is a complete hoax. It's all about control. It's all about the people, the elites, being able to be defended by their own personal security details with these types of rifles, but you and me not having that same capability. And so that's what's outrageous here. The fact that we have gates and walls around Washington, D.C. right now, yet the average citizen there doesn't have that same protection. That's a problem with me.
And there's also the talking points of, talking about banning assault weapons. And I think, let's be honest, when they say assault weapons, they mean all firearms. Anytime I've seen any debate on this, it always rounds back to, why do you need these? Why do you have to have these? It's never just one type of gun over the other. It's always all of them. So when we're talking about assault weapons, that's what or banning assault weapons. But we've seen in other countries where assault weapons, they do the buyback, or they just completely ban them altogether. But crime using other weapons skyrockets. I think I've heard, could be fake news, but I feel like I think I've heard that in Britain, knife violence is huge.
Yes. And so I actually did an interview last week for Russian television. And so Russian television, what they're trying to do is there's talks about them trying to institute something similar to the Second Amendment right there in Russia. And so that's why they reached out to me is because of my experience with them in the past. And so we talk about the UK. The UK Gun crime is up with illegal guns, right? Because people didn't surrender those guns.
Yeah.
And we also have, knife violence is at an all-time high. We saw New Zealand instituted a buyback. There was mass non-compliance,
Right.
because ultimately people understand the importance of that tool. And so, we see this in Canada. Canada's doing the same thing. They had one mass killing with a black rifle, and now there's a full-on assault on that type of platform. And instead of talking about, well, why don't we put people in a position to succeed by having these available to people to help, the first responders? There's been multiple examples, nationally, where these rifles have been used to save a life or save many, many lives. I have a friend on Facebook, as he stopped a mass killing in Texas, in Soda Springs, Texas,
Wow.
with an AR-15. 27 people were killed that day, unfortunately, but it was that rifle that allowed him to stop that shooter.
And there's also, tacking onto that, there's also even just the presence of one stops it. We saw that couple, and please forgive me, I forget where they are.
Missouri,
where the protesters busted into their private property, and just simply having them. Now, I know a little bit about guns. I know that there wasn't proper holding, and it was just kind of flailing all over the place. But just the simple presence of having it stopped their home from being, essentially burned down. That's what the protesters were wanting to do. Now they got in trouble for it afterwards. But just simply having it can eliminate a lot.
Well, and that's why I advocate proper training, right? So if they had proper training in that situation, instead of just the tool, they might have been a little bit more effective. There's a lot of things that I saw in that video that I didn't necessarily agree with, but the premise was the deterrent. And that's what these rifles, another FBI statistic is our guns are used in self-defense between 2.5 and 4 million times annually. And that's without even, firing a shot. That's typically a law-abiding citizen presenting a firearm in an aggressive manner that de-escalates that situation. Okay, women use a firearm for self-defense over 250,000 times annually, and so Eugene, there's been a couple examples of women's being attacked in the last couple of days, a violent attacker, and so without that ability to be able to defend ourselves, the women are sitting ducks.
Right. Wow. Well, thank you so much. This has just been incredible. There's a couple more things with your business focusing on gun safety, as well as teaching people how to use it properly. What are some things that you want people to know, some important things you want people to know about gun ownership and gun safety?
Well, I think one of the most important things to think of is guns are normal. There's nothing taboo about owning a firearm, especially when it comes to about being able to protect yourself and your family. And I think, there's a lot of gun owners that possibly could make us as gunners look bad because of the way they present gun ownership.
Yeah.
But from a real moderate, progressive type standpoint, it's very, very normal. And so I encourage people that, if you're thinking about getting one because you are concerned about, potential legislation, or you're concerned about being able to defend yourself or your family, I think it's really, really important to do your due diligence and research, your area, what laws are going to be there that are going to make your ability to carry a gun, a little bit harder. Also seek trainings. Training is really, really important. As an instructor, that's something that I advocate is I don't want people just carrying guns on the street. I want them to know, there's liability that goes into that. And so as new gunners are coming into the fold, is make sure you know what you can and cannot do. Also keep that gun properly stored when it's not on your person, to help keep your kids safe. There is legislation right now that's trying to mandate that. I'm not a fan of state mandates or federal mandates when it comes to proper storage. I think, education is going to go a little bit further than something that's just designed to collect revenue. And so that's, where we come down to, we're educating the families. We're also educating the kids on what not to do.
Okay, well, Derek, this has been fantastic. I won't suck up any more of your time. I know it went by quickly, but you brought up so many amazing things that honestly, there's not a lot of people talking about it. It's
Hmm.
either you have one or you don't have one.
Yeah.
And there's really no like nuance to it. And I think your company supplying training,
Hmm.
proper education,
Hmm.
and also giving practical application of how, in the event that they need to use it, using it, it
Hmm.
goes so much farther than what people think owning a gun is. So thank you so much. This has been incredible.
Well, thanks for the opportunity.